All right, so you bought the fancy espresso machine, the grinder, the scale, you're weighing everything out to the gram, and your coffee still doesn't taste any good. What gives? The first instinct is to go and find an espresso recipe, and I'm going to give you one of those in just a sec, but that's really just a starting point and very often not transferable across every bean or setup that you might run into. By the end of this video, you'll have a universal dial-in system that you can apply to any espresso machine or bean without wasting a half a bag of coffee. And I'm also going to have some tips for some more seasoned espresso users as well. But the first thing that we need to understand in order to get to that system is what extraction of coffee actually is. Espresso starts with two things: coffee beans and water. And we like to think of water as this totally neutral thing, but in this case, it's actually acting as a solvent. It's going to pull different types of compounds out of those coffee beans on its way into your cup. And the way that it does that is in the same order every single time. First, the more acidic or sour compounds get pulled out. Second, in the middle of your shot come the compounds that give a more balanced or sweet flavor. And the compounds that come last are the ones that impart bitterness into our cup. Now, we're not trying to remove any of those. In fact, it's when all of those come together in the right way that we get a really, really tasty shot of espresso. And it's actually in learning to balance all of those things that you can really become an ace at dialing in any coffee. But in order to start moving towards applying some of those principles, we do need a bit of a baseline. So I'm going to use 18 grams of ground coffee, and I'm going to aim for 36 to 42 mils of output over 25 to 30 seconds. Now that's a 1 to 2 to 1 to 2.5 ratio of ground coffee to espresso output. Good place to start. So to begin with, I'm going to weigh out that coffee. This is a Brazilian coffee that we roast through our roastery project, Got Coffee Co. It's what I would describe as a pretty approachable bean for espresso. I'm using the Baratza Encore ESP Pro. And the grind size range that Baratza gives for this grinder is in between 0 to 20. So I'm going to slide in to start right around the 15 mark. I'm going to dump my coffee in and grind it up. Now, I've not dialed in this coffee with this espresso machine and grinder before, so we're going to be working from the ground up here. I'm going to dump the coffee into my portafilter basket. I'm going to distribute it with my little distribution tool here. We will talk more about these in just a sec. And then I'm going to give it a tamp. Now, a couple things that are important when you're just getting started. If you load your coffee in here like this and you go to put it in your machine and then you take it out without doing anything and you can see an imprint or an impression of the underside of this in your coffee grounds, it means you have a little bit too much coffee in there. So you can dial that number back and then just readjust your ratio. Also, we want to make sure our machine is nice and hot. So this has been on for a good few minutes here. And this machine warms up my portafilter as well. Now, if yours doesn't, you can run a shot of hot water through your portafilter. And I'm going to do that anyway, just to make sure that the system has water all the way through it and the temperatures are equalized nicely. All right, then I'm going to load my portafilter in here, going to put my glass underneath, and then I'm going to run the shot and we'll see how long it takes to get to that 36 to 42 grams. Okay, so we got pretty lucky there. That was 42 grams in about 25 seconds. So let's see how this tastes. It's a good idea to stir this up. That mixes all those compounds up evenly into a nice blended drink. Okay, and it's pretty good. I'm feeling like it's just a little bit on the sour side. We're going to talk about how to actually taste that in just a sec, but I'm just going to make a very slight adjustment on my grind. And I'm going to take the grinder down to 14. I'm going to weigh out another 18 grams and we're going to grind it up again. We'll do the same thing, load it into our basket. Distribute it, give it a little tamp, rub any grounds off the top there. We'll load it up here, stick another glass under there, and see how we make out. All right, and that was a little bit less flow. 38 grams in just over 25 seconds, about 26 seconds. And that's the Nice touch that needed. Just a little bit of extra sweetness on there. So at this point, we're pretty close to our baseline parameters. And you might think it tastes okay. I think it could probably get a little bit better, but I don't really know how. So I'm gonna actually get you to do something a little bit weird. It's called a salami shot. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually slice our espresso shot into 3, and we're going to taste each of those thirds. And hopefully we should be able to taste the difference of those different phases of extraction. So I'm going to weigh out another 18 grams. We're going to put it in the machine, grind it up. We're going to distribute our grounds just like we did before. And then I'm going to get 3 glasses ready to go. We're going to put the portafilter in the machine. We're going to put the glass underneath. And then we're going to turn the machine on, let it run for its program, and swap the glasses out as we go. Okay, so this is the very start of the shot. This is the middle of the shot, and this is the end of the shot. Right off the bat, they're actually very different colors. Beginning is a lot darker, and the end is a lot lighter. So let's taste these. Ooh, okay, that's very sour. Okay, that is more balanced, but it is kind of missing something. Okay, and that is definitely the bitterest of the 3 cups. Now, if you're following along at home, it's good to go through and try this a couple times, go back and forth, and really familiarize yourself with what the sour compounds taste like and the bitter compounds. When you have it all mixed up in one, especially with very dark or very light roasts, it's not as always easy to tell. So you want to feel those different sensations on your tongue. Then when you pull a completed shot of espresso, you'll have a little bit more of a sense of, it's leaning a little bit more towards the sour side, so I want to try and bring it into the center. Or it's leaning a little bit more to that bitter side, I want to try and bring it back to the center. And to move that extraction slider one way or the other, there are 2 main levers that we're going to use. The first lever is grind size, and the second lever is ratio. Changing your grind size changes your extraction in 2 main ways. The net result is if we adjust our grind finer, the shot will take a little bit longer at the same ratio and be a little bit more bitter. If we adjust our grind coarser, the shot will flow more quickly, it will take less time at the same ratio, and it'll shift towards the sour end of the spectrum. Now, usually when I'm helping people figure out how to do this, I just tell them to get in the right ballpark with the grind size, because as you're fiddling around, you can overcorrect, it can get a little bit frustrating and a little bit tedious. So once you're in the right neighborhood, it's actually better to start using the second lever, which is ratio. And this is a lot more forgiving of a way to adjust your extraction than just trying to rely on grind size alone. And adjusting your ratio is not as complicated as you think. Basically, if you keep your grind size the same and you just let more espresso come out, think of it as adding more of that bitter stuff on the tail end of your shot. So if your shot is really sour, letting it run a little bit longer will increase your ratio and temper that acidity. Flip side is, if you shorten your ratio, stop the shot earlier, don't have as much coming out, that can really tone down bitterness in coffee. So let's taste this shot again. It's good, but if anything, I feel like that acidity could be tempered just a little bit. So I'm not actually going to change anything. I'm going to keep the same grind size, and I'm just going to run the shot just a little bit longer. All right, let's load this up. And I'm going to run the shot a little bit longer just to extend that ratio a bit. All right, so that was 49 mils of output, so a little bit longer of a ratio. It's nice balance. Nothing edgy, really good cup of coffee. So if you make your final adjustments by ratio, you actually can tweak things in a way that is a lot more difficult to do than with just grind size. We'll talk about specific applications here in just a sec. Now, if you go through all of that rigmarole and you're still getting inconsistent results shot to shot, things aren't seeming to make sense, you're making grind adjustments and it's not translating into the result that you think it should, the problem could very well lie with your puck prep. The things that we do to the coffee grounds before we put them in the espresso machine. The bottom line with puck preparation is we want an even, level, and consistent distribution of coffee grounds inside that basket. And that's because when the water hits it, we want it to flow through those coffee grounds as evenly as possible. And if the water is flowing more quickly through one part of the puck than another, that's called channeling. And it's something that we want to avoid. Let's say we load our portafilter and the grounds are all bunched up on one side, and then we tamp it nice and level with a calibrated tamper. That puck is still going to be more dense on the side where it was all heaped up than the side where it wasn't. The water will flow more quickly through the less dense side, resulting in a less even and less predictable extraction. Now, the trick is everybody and their uncle is going to try and sell you a tool that is supposed to fix this. And the truth is, you do need an even distribution of grounds in your basket before you tamp, but there is no one prescriptive way on how to get to that point. You can use these things called WDT tools. They have ones like this, as well as ones that are more automated on like a little stand. You can do it with blind shakers. I don't typically recommend those spin levelers because they don't get right to the bottom of the coffee bed. The bottom line is, however you get there, you want a nice fluffy, even distribution of grounds. Then the next stage is that we need to tamp it evenly and straight. You may have heard a rule that you should tamp your espresso grounds with 30 pounds of force. Kind of put that out of your head. They've studied this quite a bit and they've found that once the grounds are compressed, they don't tend to get more compressed. So as long as you've given a firm press on your tamper, it's probably okay. More important than the amount of pressure that you tamp with is how straight you tamp. And this is where self-leveling tampers are really nice because they actually force you to tamp straight down on the puck. The key with puck prep is finding the routine that is both simple enough and jives with you that it will create a consistent result with every shot that you pull. Now, the grinder does play into this a little bit as well, but is a more expensive problem to fix. As long as you're using a decent burr coffee grinder, most of the time when people are having issues with this, it's actually with their puck preparation. Okay, so moving on into a little bit more fine tuning, depending on the espresso machine that you have. Many of them have other settings that you can adjust beyond just how much water is coming out. Here's the main ones and how they impact extraction. Again, just focusing everything on where are we moving the needle in terms of that extraction level. You have PID, which is adjustable temperature. If you raise the temperature, it will extract more, and if you drop it, it will extract less. Now, generally, I recommend not maxing out your temperature because if you really hit it with super high temperature water, you can start to pull out some more negative compounds that will affect the taste of your espresso. I generally advocate for a little bit more gentle of a heat. Most of the time, I'm in around the 90 to 92 Celsius mark. I can often go lower than that as well. Some espresso machines actually have a bit of an offset from what they display on the screen to what they are in reality. So you just want to Google that and make sure you're in a decent range. I would say erring on being a little bit cooler than being too hot. Pre-infusion is another thing that you can adjust on some machines. This will saturate your puck at the very beginning of the shot and then pause for a moment before it does the main extraction. And actually more helpful than any impact on the extraction itself is that pre-infusion makes for a more even flow once the main pressure hits. Once that puck is nice and gently saturated, when that high pressure comes, it's going to be harder for the water to worm its way really quickly through one specific section of the puck. So pre-infusion is something that can actually, for a more even flow and more consistent results. When it comes to pressure, you may have heard 9 bar is kind of the standard. If you have a machine that you can drop the pressure, going down to say like 6 bar can make, again, for a more gentle extraction extraction and less channeling. And that moves us into the last, and I think by far the most interesting part of this video: how to apply those extraction levers to any coffee that you may have. Because we've looked at all the tools that we have available to move that extraction slider one way or the other. But where this really goes into overdrive is when you pair that with how soluble individual coffees are or aren't. Not all coffees are equally soluble. And if you want to think about it, you can think about it this way. If you have table salt and you try dissolving it into water, it's going to dissolve a lot more quickly than, let's say, kosher salt. Kosher salt is less soluble. It's going to take more time to dissolve. And this is a really great analogy for grind size and solubility. You go finer on your grind, and it makes that coffee more easy to extract. But there are other factors that can make our coffees more or less soluble as well. Take roast level, and starting with dark roast in particular. Dark roasted coffee has been in the roaster for longer. It's been more broken down through the roasting process and is thus more soluble. So you probably need to extract it a little bit less in order to get a good result. So if you have a more darkly roasted coffee, you may want to go a little bit tighter on your ratio or a little bit coarser grind size. Now, if you have a very lightly roasted coffee, the opposite is true. It's spent less time in the roaster, it's less broken down by the roasting process, and is thus less soluble. So we need to change some things to increase the extraction of that coffee. We may need to go with a finer grind and or a longer ratio than our 1:2 to 1:2.5. So even just looking at the roast level of a coffee, you can make some educated guesses on how you need to adjust those two levers in order to get the extraction that you want, which is much more powerful than just using a recipe. Now, as far as coffee solubility goes, the roast level has one of the biggest and clearest impacts on how soluble a specific coffee is. But there are other factors that can influence this too. One of them is processing method. If you have what's called a washed coffee, that coffee has had the fruit stripped off it shortly after harvest and dried completely out in the open without any additional steps. Washed processed coffees tend to be more dense and less soluble. So you need to sometimes do some things to boost the extraction to get the best flavor. Now, when you look at naturally processed coffees, those are coffees that are actually dried with the fruit on them, and then it's stripped off later. Now, when a coffee is processed like that, the actual bean on the inside ends up being less dense and a little bit more soluble than washed coffees. So we may want to do a slightly finer grind or longer ratio on a washed coffee than maybe a natural of the same bean. If you add any kind of fermentation, say anaerobic processing or other types of fermentation processing, that tends to increase solubility. Again, make the coffee a little bit easier to extract. And decaf processing can actually have a big impact here. That has a pretty drastic impact on the makeup of that coffee bean at a microscopic level, and it makes decaf coffees typically a lot more soluble than their non-decaffeinated counterparts. Now, they often also tend to flow a little bit faster, so you may need to actually go for a finer grind, but tighten up the ratio to get a good equilibrium. Another thing that can have a big impact is altitude. Higher altitude coffees, generally, there's some exceptions, but generally tend to be a little bit more dense. That makes those coffees less soluble, which means you may need to use those levers to extract them more. So you can begin to take a look at all of these factors, roast level, altitude, processing method, and before you even touch any of your equipment, you can make some educated guesses about, okay, I'm going to need to extract this coffee a little bit more or a little bit less. Then you can make some decisions about how you want to do that. You can make some initial adjustments on your grind. Again, go finer for less soluble coffees or coarser for more soluble. Get the timing in the right ballpark, and then use your ratio to fine tune the extraction. This coffee, for example, is a fairly low altitude Brazilian, naturally processed. And as far as we roast, this is more on the definitely medium end of the spectrum. So we have several factors going together to make this coffee a little bit more soluble. We have another coffee, a Colombian coffee that is washed process, very high altitude actually, and we do a very light roast on that coffee. So we have several factors there working to make that coffee a lot less soluble. And when I brew it on espresso, typically I need to go a little bit finer and extend the ratio in order to get the best flavor. Now, once you get into this, there's actually some really cool stuff that you can do. Let's say you have a very lightly roasted, very expressive coffee when it comes to acidity. You smell it and it's just as like light and lots of fruit notes. You can actually go coarse on your grind and extend the ratio way out. You know, even go up to 1:4, 1:5, something like that, and pull the shot very fast. That's something called a turbo shot, and it just is manipulating those levers in a different way to get a good flavor. Now, it's going to be usually a little bit lighter body as well, not something everybody loves, but it can be a very lively and intense shot with the acidity, but also very sweet and pleasant and aromatic. On the flip side, with dark roasted coffees, you can do something called a ristretto, which is a very short ratio, thick, goopy shot. And if you pull those coffees that way, it can result in a very sweet, balanced shot without a lot of bitterness. Once you understand those principles of extraction, you're out of recipe territory and you're into critical thinking about your coffee beans. You're thinking about how soluble your specific coffee is or isn't, and then you're translating the tools that you have available to extract it more or less. Espresso moves from being a pretty basic recipe beverage to being this amazing, powerful set of flavor shaping tools that you have at your disposal. You're going to be wasting less coffee, and you're going to develop this almost sixth sense for being able to dial in any number of coffee beans. Now, if you're new to the channel, you got to do one thing, and that is subscribe. Because I have a lot of fun around here making these videos. I'm always reviewing cool stuff and making interesting videos about specialty coffee. And if you've been around for a while, I'd actually love for your input as well. Drop your top tip down there in the comments for any new espresso users. I hope this video was helpful, that your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.